I've been hiking alone since I was 19. That's 11 years. I know how to read a trail, how to manage weather, how to handle myself when a map doesn't match the terrain. I'm not someone who panics. I want to say that first, because what I'm about to describe is the kind of thing that sounds like panic when you try to explain it to someone who wasn't there. This happened 3 years ago, late September, in a section of national forest in northern Pennsylvania. I won't name the specific trail because I honestly don't think that matters, and I don't want anyone going there looking for whatever I found. I was doing a solo overnight, nothing unusual. I'd done the route twice before, once in spring and once the previous fall. I knew where the water sources were. I knew where the terrain got rocky after mile 9. I knew the good flat spots for a tent. I drove up Friday evening after work, parked at the trailhead around 6:30, and started walking in with maybe 2 hours of usable daylight left. My plan was to get to a campsite I liked at about the 4-mile mark, set up before dark, cook something simple, sleep, and then continue deeper into the trail Saturday morning. The first 4 miles went fine. I reached the site, cleared a few branches off the flat ground I remembered, pitched my tent, boiled some water for a dehydrated meal. By 9 o'clock, I was in my sleeping bag, reading with a headlamp. Normal night, nothing strange. The forest was quiet, the way fall forests are quiet. Insects, mostly gone, leaves rustling occasionally, distant owl once. I fell asleep probably around 10. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my watch the moment my eyes opened. I didn't know why I'd woken up. There was no sound I could identify, no physical discomfort. I just came awake suddenly, fully, the way you sometimes do when something has changed in the environment and your body registers it before your brain catches up. I lay still and listened. The forest was silent. And I mean genuinely silent, not the normal nighttime forest quiet with its layers of small sounds, but a flat, total absence of sound that felt almost like pressure. No wind, no insects, no distant movement. Nothing. I told myself it was nothing. Temperature inversion sometimes kills sound in forests. Animals go quiet for their own reasons. I'd heard this kind of silence before on night hikes, briefly. I tried to go back to sleep. I couldn't. Not because of fear exactly, more like the way you can't sleep in a room when something is slightly off and you can't identify what it is. I lay there for maybe 15 minutes and then I heard it. Footsteps, not running, not frantic. Slow, deliberate footsteps on leaves and packed ground, coming from the direction of the trail. They were heavy, too heavy for a deer, which move more delicately even when unhurried, too rhythmic for a bear, which tend to shift their weight unevenly. They sounded like a person walking. I didn't move. I'm not sure why that was my first instinct to stay completely still, but it was. I had a small knife on my pack zipper, the kind you carry for camp utility, and I moved my hand toward it slowly while keeping the rest of my body motionless. The footsteps stopped. I waited. 30 seconds, a minute, nothing. Then they started again, closer now. I sat up slowly inside my sleeping bag and put my hand on my headlamp without turning it on. I've read that you shouldn't blind yourself and whoever's outside at the same time, that a dark, adapted eye is better than a lamp that gives away your exact position. I don't know if that's actually true, but it was what I thought in that moment. The footsteps stopped again, maybe 20 feet from my tent. I could hear something breathing, not loudly, not a loud, cinematic, heavy breathing, but the particular quietness of something that is trying not to be heard and isn't fully succeeding. A soft, controlled exhalation. I turned on my headlamp and unzipped the tent door in the same motion and said loudly, "Who's there?" Nothing. My light swept the tree line. I could see about 30 feet clearly, and then the darkness closed off. The trees, the ground, leaf litter. No one. I sat at the door of my tent for a long time, long enough that my feet got cold. I didn't hear footsteps again. I didn't hear anything. The forest stayed silent in that strange flat way until maybe 4 in the morning, when the normal small sounds gradually returned. A bird I couldn't identify, wind picking up, something small moving in the leaves off to my left. In daylight, I looked at the ground near my tent. The soil around that site was soft from recent rain. There were my boot prints from the previous evening, clear and readable. And there were other marks, not boot prints exactly, more like places where the leaf litter had been compressed and disturbed, in a pattern that could have been footsteps, or could have been something else entirely. I couldn't tell. I stood there for several minutes looking at them, and I genuinely couldn't determine what had made them. I packed up and hiked out that morning instead of continuing. I didn't feel unsafe exactly. I felt unsettled in a way I don't have precise language for. Like I'd been examined by something that hadn't made a decision yet. So I've told this story a few times, and the responses are always one of two things. It was an animal, or it was another hiker. Both are probably correct. I know that. I have no reason to believe otherwise. But I've camped in those woods before and since, and I've heard animals moving at night, and I've heard other hikers, and neither of those things has ever felt like what I heard at 2 in the morning that September. I can't explain the difference. I just know there was one. My sister and I used to do trail runs together on weekends. She's the one who got me into it. She ran cross-country in college and has a kind of effortless relationship with distance that I've always envied. I'm more of a mid-pace plotter, but I liked the company and liked the way a long forest run makes the rest of the week feel manageable. There's a trail system about 40 minutes from where we both lived at the time, in the foothills of a small mountain range in western North Carolina. A network of interconnected loops, well marked, popular enough that you'd reliably see other runners on weekend mornings. Nothing remote, nothing serious. We'd run there probably 24 times by the summer this happened. It was a Saturday in July. We started early to beat the heat, parked around 7, signed the trail register at the trailhead kiosk, started running. Our usual route was about 11 miles, taking the outer loop and then cutting back through the ridge connector. We'd done it enough times that it was mostly automatic, just running and talking. We were maybe 4 miles in on a section of trail that curves around the east side of a ridge and gets narrow, single file, narrow, with a steep drop on one side and a rocky slope on the other. My sister was a few steps ahead of me. We'd just been talking about something ordinary, her apartment, a problem with her landlord. I don't even remember exactly. Normal conversation. She stopped suddenly. I almost ran into her. "There's a man," she said quietly. I looked past her. About 60 feet ahead of us on the trail, standing in the middle of the path, was a man. He wasn't hiking. He wasn't moving at all. He was just standing there facing us. He was wearing dark clothing, jeans, and what looked like a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat. And he was holding something in one hand that I couldn't immediately identify. Not raised, just held at his side. We stopped. He didn't move. The immediate logic my brain reached for was that he was a hiker who'd stopped to rest or look at something. That's normal. People stop on trails. But he was facing us directly, and he wasn't looking at anything except us. And he'd been standing there when we came around the curve, which meant he'd had some time to see us approaching, and he still hadn't moved or acknowledged us or stepped aside. My sister said, quietly and without turning her head, "We're going to turn around." We turned around and started running back the way we'd come. Not sprinting, she told me later. She'd made a deliberate decision not to sprint because she didn't want to trigger a chase response if that was a real possibility, just running. Steady and quick. I looked back once, about 30 seconds in. He was following us, not running, but walking at a pace that was faster than a casual walk, purposeful, on the trail behind us. We didn't talk. We just ran. My sister knew the trail system better than I did, and she took a turn I didn't expect. Off the main path, onto a connector trail I'd never used, and then another turn. And then we were on a wider fire road that I recognized from the trailhead map. We ran the fire road all the way to the parking lot, which came out about a quarter mile from where we'd parked. We got in the car, and my sister drove immediately without stopping to discuss it. About 2 miles down the road, she said, "Did you see what he was holding?" I said I couldn't tell. She said it looked like a length of rope or cord. She wasn't certain. She said she could have been wrong. She said it with the tone of someone trying to be accurate rather than dramatic, and I believed her because she's not a dramatic person. We reported it to the ranger station. A ranger took down what we described our location, the approximate time, his description, which was limited because we'd been 60 feet away, and startled and said they'd send someone to check the area. They were polite about it and took it seriously enough to write things down. But they also said they got reports like this occasionally, and that it was sometimes someone who was confused or lost, or who had their own reasons for being on the trail that turned out to be harmless. I don't know what that man's reasons were. I don't know what he was holding. I don't know if following us was intentional, the way my fear told me it was, or if he was simply walking in the same direction, and we interpreted his pace wrong because we were scared. What I know is that my sister has been running trails for 15 years, alone and with other people, and she made the decision to turn around in about 3 seconds. She didn't deliberate. She saw him, she assessed, and she decided. That tells me something. She trusts her instincts in environments like that more than almost anyone I know, and her instinct was immediate and unambiguous. We still trail run, but we always go with a group now. Not because we're afraid, exactly. More because that Saturday made concrete something we'd treated as abstract before, that trails feel safe and are usually safe, and that those two things are not the same. This one is harder to explain because nothing definitive happened. I've thought about it for years and I still don't have a clear category to put it in, which is part of why it stays with me. I grew up in a rural part of Minnesota, and the property my family owned backed up to a large stretch of state forest. Not wilderness exactly. There were logging roads through parts of it. Hunters used it in season, snowmobilers in winter. But it was large enough and dense enough that you could walk 20 minutes from our back fence and feel genuinely isolated. I spent a lot of time in those woods as a kid and a teenager. I knew them as well as I knew anything. When I was 17, the summer before my senior year, I started noticing something I couldn't quite name. It built up slowly enough that at first I dismissed each individual piece of it as nothing. The first thing was a fire pit I didn't recognize. About a half-mile into the trees, off a deer trail I used as a shortcut when I was going to a fishing spot I liked, there was a small clearing I'd passed through dozens of times. It had always been empty ground, maybe 15 feet across, where the tree canopy was thin enough that grass grew in patches. One day in early June, I noticed a fire pit in the middle of it that hadn't been there before. Not an elaborate structure, just rocks arranged in a rough circle around a patch of burned ground. Recent burn marks, ash that hadn't been rained into gray. Someone had been there recently. I told myself it was hunters, or people who camped occasionally, which happened in those woods without official sanction. Perfectly plausible. I noted it and moved on. The second thing was harder to explain away. About 3 weeks after I first saw the fire pit, I was walking back from the fishing spot in the late afternoon, probably 5 o'clock, and I had the distinct feeling that I was being followed. I want to be precise about this. It wasn't a sound I heard or a movement I saw. It was a feeling, the particular heightening of awareness that I now know is your nervous system processing environmental information below conscious threshold. Something was there, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. I never saw it. I turned around twice and saw nothing, but the feeling was constant and specific for almost 10 minutes until I got back to the deer trail, and the sensation, for whatever reasons, stopped. I mentioned it to my older brother that evening. He's a straightforward person, not given to either reassurance or alarm, and he said it was probably a deer or a coyote, and that animals sometimes track humans out of curiosity. That was almost certainly right. The third thing happened in August. There was a structure in the woods that I'd never seen before. Not a fire pit this time. Something more deliberate. Branches had been cut or broken and assembled into what looked like a shelter. A low lean-to structure, maybe 4 feet high and 6 feet wide, built against the side of a fallen tree about 100 yards off the main deer trail. It was new construction. The cut ends of the branches were pale and not yet weathered, and the leaves on the branches still had color rather than being dry and brown. Inside the lean-to, and I did look, I crouched down and looked. There were a few things: a folded piece of plastic sheeting, a tin can that had been used for cooking, and a shirt, neatly folded, that looked like it had belonged to a child. Small-sized printed pattern, the kind of shirt a kid maybe 8 or 9 years old would wear. I didn't touch anything. I stood there for a while trying to think through what I was looking at. An adult camping in the woods was one explanation. The shirt had an obvious explanation I was trying not to land on. I walked home. I told my parents. My father went back to the location with me and confirmed what I'd described. He called the county sheriff's department. 2 deputies came out the following day and examined the site. What happened after that is where the story gets frustrating rather than resolved. They came back to tell my parents that they'd found what we'd described, that the structure appeared to have been used for camping, that the shirt was consistent with a child's garment, and that there was no obvious evidence of a crime. They said they'd check with missing persons, which I assume they did because we never heard anything further from them. About a week after that, I went back to check the clearing with the fire pit. It was empty. No structure, no signs of recent use. Whoever had been there was gone. I've looked up news archives from that area in that time period, the summer of that year. I've done this probably 4 or 5 times over the years. I never found anything that seemed clearly connected, no missing children from that area, no reported crimes in those woods. That absence is the most unsettling part for me because it means either nothing happened, which is possible, or whatever happened didn't get reported, or it got reported in a way I wasn't able to find. The shirt bothers me more than anything else about it. Not the fire pit, not the feeling of being followed, not the lean-to itself. Just the shirt, small, folded neatly, folded like someone took care with it. I don't know what was in those woods that summer. I've made my peace with not knowing, mostly. But I think about that clearing sometimes when I'm somewhere quiet, and I think about the specific quality of those deputies' faces when they told us there was no obvious evidence of a crime, not dismissive, not skeptical, just very careful about exactly what they were and weren't saying. That's the part that stays with me, the precision of it, the way they chose those particular words.